good week? Yeah? I've had a great week. And then last night happened. I was on schedule to get about 6 hours of sleep, which was going to be really exciting. And then my daughter woke up, I think 4 times. I mean, after 3, I kind of lost count. And and so this morning, I was in church in New Song, in here, and I kept falling asleep during Jim's sermon. It had nothing to do with Jim preaching. It had everything to do with my lack of sleep. And at one point, it was one of those moments where I was asleep, and I could have sworn he said my name. And that's like my ultimate fear, right? Because he'll reference, because I'm sitting here and I'm on staff, so he'll say something about me every once in a while. And like, that was my ultimate fear. I looked up and had a leading person next to me, and I said, did you say my name? Yes, I was asleep. So, if you're asleep, I'm not going to call on your name. It's my ultimate fear in church, because I'm often sleep deprived, because I have little children. But having little children is such a blessing at this time of year because they are super excited about Christmas, right? They are really, really excited. I've got 3 children, and so we've got Caleb is the oldest, and he's 5. He just had a birthday party. And then Hannah Claire is 3, and Andy is 18 months old. And so they are really, really excited about Christmas. And so they've been running around, and they keep trying to decorate our tree more. Every time they find something, they put it on the tree. But Christmas is a really exciting time, especially for children. And the interesting thing to me is that, is what we're going to be talking about today. Is Christmas a pagan holiday? So I had a friend who sent me a YouTube video the other day, and there is this guy on there, and he had he was going on and on. He had 30 different things that he was talking about how Christmas was pagan, and then how the Pope was a pagan, and he went, all the way down that rabbit trail. But what we're going to do is we're going to this evening talk about kind of the main pieces of this claim, and really kind of see where they come, and we're going to end up, I hope, in a place that's going to be formative, that's going to help us when we wake up tomorrow. So, I'm just going to give you a little bit of a disclaimer. When I look at history, back at history, unless somebody, was a really bad person, right? Unless, it was this guy who, massacred tons of people or committed genocide, I'm kind of a more optimistic person, and I'm going to assume that they had good reasons for, good motivations for the things that they were doing. And so sometimes, when you look back at history, and what we're going to be doing today, you can see it in either a positive or a negative way, right? And unless it was spelled out in some book or some guy's journal, then it's not always really clear which direction you take. But I always take the positive one, so just so you know, here's the disclaimer. Now, we're going to be talking about Christmas, and the first question is the date of Christmas. The interesting thing is that really for the first 300 years ago, for the first 3 centuries or so, Christmas wasn't in December. Actually, Christmas wasn't really on the calendar at all. For the first 300 years of the church's history, they didn't celebrate the birth of Jesus. And the main reason was that they did not want to be confused with all of the different pagan religions of the time. Because, as we're going to discover, celebrating the birthday of a god was a big part of their worship. And so, they didn't want to celebrate the birthday of Jesus because, A, his birth wasn't the most important part of his life, and B, it made them look like just another one of the religions. And so, for the first 300 years, there was no celebration of Christmas at all. And so, the real question is, why December 25th, right? And underlying that is the question, when was Jesus actually born? Well, the first guy that we have any kind of written account of when it is that Jesus was born was a guy named Clement of Alexandria. And so this piece of writing that we've got from him is dates between the year 150 and the year 215. Right? So who knows? That's a large span of time. Sometime in his lifespan, he wrote this. But what he said was, he was pretty sure, and he said a lot of the people that he knew were also pretty sure in that early time frame that, that Jesus was born on May the 20th. May the 20th. All right, so that is really a long way from December the 25th. Now, just a few years later, there was a bunch of debate about this. Right when it kind of got to the point where they were getting ready to start celebrating it, there was a big kind of discussion around when Jesus' birthday was, and there was several dates floated. March the 20th, March the 21st. You know, I really wish that it was March the 19th, because that's my birthday, and that would be a pretty cool birthday to share, like a famous person to share a birthday with, you know what I'm saying? Especially as a pastor. So, but it's those kind of, you know, it's all in that spring time frame, right? And so you have somewhere between March the 20th and May the 20th that was kind of the consensus for when Jesus was born. Which begs the question then, why are we celebrating Christmas on December the 25th, right? So, here's where we get to the pagan piece of it. There was, in the Romans, the Roman time, the Romans celebrated the midwinter. And really, so one of the biggest pieces of most world religions kind of revolve around solstice and equinoxes and that kind of thing, right? And so the winter solstice is December the 21st this year. And it's always right around the 20th and the 21st. And so there is this time that there is, throughout the world, there's lots of celebrations. And the Romans were some of those. And so they celebrated midwinter's Saturnalia festival. They kind of concluded sometimes with that December the 21st. It was a super popular festival. And so because of its popular time, there was lots of other festivals that began to be celebrated at that same time. There was a festival called the Sol Invictus, the birth of another god named Mithras. I'm really bad at words, but you know, something like that. And all of these things were related to the sun and the sun god. And so those were all right there around December the 25th. Now, for a while, it was like one day. But they were like, why party for one day when you can party for 3 days, right? And then this guy named Caligula came around, and he was like, why party for 3 days when you can party for 5 days? And see, it's kind of the same, and I feel like I understand him. Because we're like, why have Mardi Gras parades on one day when you can have them on 2? And like, why not just do it for the entire month before Mardi Gras, right? So I think that we can understand and appreciate the lengthening of these celebrations. And so what happened is, by the time the church was really getting close to a time where they were going to celebrate Christmas, there was a lot of pagan festivals that happened right around this time and happened on or near or ended with December the 25th. And so the Christians were faced with a choice. Do we celebrate our birth of our God at the same time as them, or do we do something different? And so, if you watch the YouTube videos, it says, well, obviously, they decided to celebrate it at the same time as they were already celebrating other things. And so they basically said, all right, you guys are going to celebrate the birth of Mithras, and we're going to celebrate the birth of Jesus. And so it'll be great, because we'll all be celebrating at the same time. If somebody was named Mithras, and they decide to be Christian, then they don't have to change holidays. It's all the same, right? Your parents come in town, and we're good, right? Now, there is another side of the story. The other side of the story says that right around the same time, they were formalizing the date that they believed that Mary became pregnant. That is the feast or the festival of the Annunciation, right? And so it's this festival, this church festival, this church feast day that is celebrating the moment that Mary became pregnant with Jesus. And that eventually came to a really firm date and that was March 25th. And so that's the day that the church celebrates that. And if you think about it, now, I don't mean to throw math on you at nighttime, but 9 months from March the 25th until the birth is December 25th. Right. So that's the getting pregnant and having the baby, right? Which makes total sense. And so the question is, which one was it? Well, if you look at history, if you read history books, there is one thing that you can be sure of. One thing about history that you can be very clear on, and that is that there is no easy answer, right? Usually, a whole lot of things are happening at the same time, and they all come together and converge to make this one event happen. And that's most likely what happens with choosing December the 25th. Right? At the same time as there are these festivals going on, there is this kind of debate over when we celebrate the Annunciation, right? And so, as we're doing all of these things, we've got all of our friends and our family that celebrate on these days, and then we've got this Annunciation thing, and all kind of conversions, and right about the same time, they start celebrating Christmas on December the 25th. So, if you want to know whether or not the choice of the date is based on pagan holidays, the answer is maybe. A strong maybe. And I would say probably, and I would say definitely, that had an influence on the choice of the date. Right? So, that's the date. Now, the most important thing in my son's world earlier this month was getting a Christmas tree. Because we didn't get it on Thanksgiving Day, or the day after Thanksgiving. And so every time I got home, it was, are we going to get the tree? Are we going to get the tree? Are we going to get... And then we got the tree, right? We got the tree, and we set it up. And then, well, what are we going to decorate it? Can we do it tonight? Can we do it right now? No? Well, we're going to put the lights on, so we put the lights on, right? And then the lights are on, and he wants to stay up all night and decorate the tree. So, but this is the tree, the Christmas tree, is one of the most widely celebrated pieces of all the Christmas stuff. Everywhere, all over the globe, there's Christmas trees, no matter where you go. Some people eat turkey, some people eat ham, some people eat duck, some people eat veal, some people eat, but they all have a Christmas tree, right? So, the tree, where does the tree come from? Well, the earliest deal with trees is at that same really early moment where Christmas was becoming popular. And that was that Saturnalia festival. And that was a pagan worship time. And what they would do is they would decorate trees, not inside their house, but trees outside their house. And so that's the earliest piece of the whole tree history. But it appears that even though it would be really cool to say at the very, very first Christmases that were celebrated, they used Christmas trees, it looks like that's probably not the case. As a matter of fact, it looks like trees became part of the Christmas celebration when the whole Christmas thing made its way into Europe. See, here's the deal. In Europe, they had all of these religions that worshipped trees. Okay, there were sacred trees. And so some of those religions, they would take the trees, and at certain times of the year, especially in winter, they would cut the trees down, they would bring them into their house, and they would decorate them, and they would be symbols of life in the midst of snow and the death of winter, right? And then there were some trees that were thought of to be sacred trees. And they were sacred either because, something famously in their religion happened near them, or because they thought that some sort of special spirit was around the tree. There were lots of different reasons that trees were considered sacred, but some of them, a whole lot of that area of Europe, worshipped, trees were a big part of their worship, so they would actually, instead of cutting trees down and bringing them into their house, they would actually go out in the middle of the winter, in the cold, 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 and they would worship around these sacred trees. So it appears that when Christmas was becoming popular in that part of Europe, there was this legend that began to be popular. All right, so in a culture that was obsessed with trees during worship, obviously, you would imagine that some of those legends would involve trees, and that's what happened. So the legend was that when Jesus was born, in the dead of winter, that every tree throughout the whole world miraculously shook off its ice and snow and produced new shoots of green, like on that moment in history, right? Which, yeah, definitely didn't happen. But that was the legend that began to happen, that began to circulate. And so because of that legend, and because of their fondness for trees, in the very earliest Christmas celebrations in Europe, they began to cut down trees, and they would take them into their house, and they would put lights on them, and they would do all the things that people around them from other religions would do when they decorated their houses during that winter time with trees. But theirs had a meaning that was beyond what the normal people thought of as Christmas tree. For them, they said that the Christmas tree symbolized Jesus in a whole lot of ways, right? So the Christmas tree was an evergreen. And so what that meant is at that point, everything else was dead, right? Everything else in the world was dead, except for these evergreen trees. And they would point to the evergreen tree, and they would say, look, you see how everything else in the world is dead? Well, when Jesus came into the world, the whole world was dead to their sin, right? Sin separates us from God and causes a spiritual death. And so when Jesus came into the world, he brought life where there was death. And so these trees, in the dead of winter being green, symbolize that act of Jesus, bringing life into a dead world. And so they bring them into their house, and they put candles on them. Though I can't imagine, I forget to turn out the lights on my Christmas tree. If you forget to blow out the candle on your Christmas tree, it's a whole other problem, right? So they have the candles on the trees, and they would put stars on the top, and the star would symbolize the star in the story in the Bible, right? The Star of Bethlehem that led the wise men to the manger. And so all of that happens, and Christmas trees are part of the festivities. So are Christmas trees pagan? Well, they definitely have pagan roots. And yet, when Christians brought them in, they had a whole other reason for bringing them in. And then, at a very small thing, but the wreath, right? So, if you've been in churches, we don't have one here right now, but a lot of times at Christmas time, there's an Advent wreath, right? So there's a wreath, but it's not on the wall. It's like this, and there's candles coming up out of it. Well, that's where the wreaths on our door come from. It comes from the Advent wreaths, and the Advent wreaths began a long time ago. It began kind of in Greece, where when somebody did something really great and you wanted to reward them, they didn't do trophies, they didn't do medals, they gave them a crown of laurels, right? And so they made a crown out of vines, and that was like their gift. And then that whole idea of using these round vines to create these crowns made its way over into Europe. And when that happened, it turned into evergreens, and then that transitioned into this Advent wreath. And the Advent wreath is a symbol of Christmas. So there's multiple candles in the wreath, and I can't believe we don't have one. Sorry, but there's multiple candles in the wreath, and they all have a symbol. And so for the 4 Sundays of Advent, we would come up here and we would light a candle, and that candle would symbolize peace, hope, all the different pieces of Christmas. And then on the New Year's Eve or on Christmas Day, you'll light the center candle that symbolizes the light of Jesus, right? And so that's where the wreaths come from. And so that really doesn't have any pagan roots at all. It just has roots of celebration. So there you are. There's the basic information about Christianity or Christmas and the pagan roots. Now that's interesting. But I feel like there is more to it than that. Because when I look at the fact that they chose a date that kind of had, at least in part, was based on pagan worship practices. When they chose these trees because they lived in a place where other people worshipped the trees. it kind of unsettles me a little bit. It makes me uncomfortable, and really it makes me ask the question, why? Like, why did they do that? Why would you choose that? Our pastor, our senior pastor here, his name is Jeff Spiller, and I really love Jeff. And he said this, I've been in a couple of meetings with him where he said this phrase that has stuck with me. And it's talking about basic human needs. So, right, we all need food, we all need water, we all need shelter, there's some basic human needs. But he says that one of the basic human needs is the need for God. Which really struck me the first time he said it. But if this was true, that would mean that in every culture all around the world, that you would have to have people reaching out to worship God. Right? And it turns out that that's exactly the case. No matter what part of the planet you're on, no matter where you are, every continent, every island that is inhabited with humans has some sort of religion. And has had for centuries and millennia. The Bible talks about it in Romans chapter 1. Verse 20 it says, "For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse." And throughout the scriptures, it is very clear that God has placed within each one of us a desire for connection with him. And so, throughout the globe, you have these faiths that have sprung up from that basic human need. This need, this desire to connect with God. And so what that means is when you go into a culture, when you go into a place that has never heard of Jesus, that has never had a Bible, that has never had a missionary, that has never heard anything about our God, you have to go there with a little bit of respect for their religion. Because that is their response to the desire that God has placed within them to connect with him. And so even though, for the very beginning of Christianity, they tried to distance themselves from any other faiths, right around the year 300 or so, they began to change the way they thought about that. And they said, look, when we go into other parts of the world, when we encounter people of other faiths, we need to treat their faith with respect. As a matter of fact, there's this guy named Gregory the Great. He was a pope, and he actually was pretty great. He was really responsible for, maintaining the faith in spite of the Dark Ages. So Gregory the Great had this really amazing way of looking at faith. And he said, look, when you go into a town, and there are people that are worshiping other gods, let me tell you exactly what it says. When there's local pagan temples are not to be destroyed, but converted to churches. And pagan festivals are to be celebrated as feasts to Christian events or saints or whatever. What he said is when you go into a community that has been trying to worship God but has had no knowledge of him, you go in there and you say, look, you have been trying to worship God. Let me tell you who he is. Our God sent his son to die for us. And you tell them the story. And so you say, look, this is the place where you've been trying to worship him, this temple, right? This pagan temple. Let's replace this symbol with the symbol of the one true God. And let's worship him here. He's the person you've been trying to worship this whole time. You've had these feasts, you've had these festivals. Great, fantastic. Let's find ways that your festivals have been pointing you to God this whole time. You didn't even know it. And so that's what they did. They went, and there are so many temples, there are so many churches throughout the world that originally were not Christian churches. But when the people turned their hearts to Christ, they didn't have to tear that building down and build a new building somewhere else. Instead, they just said, look, this whole time we've been trying to worship God, and now we know who He is, and we're going to worship Him. And so, what they did is they used what the people knew to explain the gospel. So when there were people around worshiping the birth of the sun god, right? It was actually God was the Son of Righteousness. They said, let me tell you who the Son of Righteousness really is. He was born in this miraculous way, and they would use that moment that was usually used to worship Mithras to communicate the gospel of Jesus. And so throughout our church's history, throughout the history of our faith, Christmas, over and over again, has been used to communicate the truth of Jesus, using the symbols of that culture. And so we get to the place where we've come for several weeks, and that is, so what? What does this matter when I wake up tomorrow morning? Well, I think that in many ways we're in a very similar place. Right, our culture is obsessed with Christmas, and we've been talking about that the last couple of weeks. There are people who are buying presents for everybody they know, and hopefully they'll be able to pay off those presents by next Christmas, right? We have people that are doing all kinds of wild. There's parties galore, right? I mean, I've gone to 3 Christmas parties already this year, and we're just in the second week of Christmas, right? Our culture is obsessed with Christmas. And so I think the so what for Christmas for us, for our pagan roots of Christmas, is to say, look, Christmas throughout history has really been about using the traditions of our culture to communicate the truth of Jesus. And so, this is an opportunity for us. Right? All the people who have gone before us, they said, look, we're going to use all of these symbols, right? No matter what those symbols we're talking about before, and we're going to use them to communicate the truth of Jesus. And so, when we receive a gift, we are thankful for the gift, but we want to remember that as wonderful as the iPhone 5 that we're hoping to get for Christmas, as wonderful as, the new pair of awesome boots that we're hoping to get for Christmas, as wonderful as those gifts are, when we receive them and we're excited about them, what you go through our head is, man, this is a wonderful gift, but Jesus was a better gift. Because our gift giving should remind us of the gift that God gave us in the form of His Son. The gift that we're celebrating Christmas on. And likewise, when we give gifts, we give gifts saying, man, we love you, we're grateful, we think you're a wonderful person, and I really hope that this makes you, happy or saves you time or whatever it is, or, at least deals with the fact that you gave me a gift and I have to give you one back, right? We say, I'm giving you this gift, but it's because God gave us a gift, right? And this gift is just a tiny symbol of what God did thousands of years ago. So hopefully, this Christmas, we can echo our forefathers and our foremothers and use the symbols that we have at our fingertips to communicate the truth of the gospel. But here's what I think is really most exciting, because I really have been thinking about this a lot this week, and I wondered, we've got a whole lot of really great cultural festivities in our country. And so my question is, why should we stop with Christmas? You know, I think about the 4th of July, right? Not just because I'm a pyromaniac and I love fireworks, but because it's a brilliant symbol for us as a faith community, right? It's this moment in our history, right, where we said, all right, we want freedom. And we did whatever it took. We did whatever it took to get the freedom that we so passionately desire. What a brilliant symbol of Jesus, right? Where we were enslaved to sin. And God sent His Son to do whatever it took to free us from that and to give us true freedom. I think that we have an opportunity anytime we're doing something really exciting to take that moment and use that moment to communicate the truth of Jesus, the truth of the gospel. And see, that's really what these whole pagan roots of our faith are about. Yeah, definitely. There were pagan things going on, and the early Christians decided they were going to not ignore it, but use it for Jesus. So that's my prayer for you. That you would see God in all of the things that are happening. Even the difficult things that are happening this season. That you would see Him in all those places, and then you would name Him. Right? You would not be afraid to speak up and say, you know, this kind of reminds me of this piece of my faith. Let's pray. God, thank you that the people who've gone before us who are Christians were not afraid to use whatever it took to tell people about you. So God, over the next couple of weeks during Christmas, we pray that you would give us the courage that they have. The courage to speak out and to use all of these beautiful, rich symbols that are at our fingertips to tell people about you. In Jesus' name we pray.